Edgar Langley believed in the calm predictability of routine flights across the sun-scorched desert. But when an unscheduled stop becomes a lifeline for his mysterious passenger, he realizes this journey is far from ordinary. Hi everyone. Welcome to Inspiring Stories. Edgar Langley loved the freedom of flying small planes. After years in commercial aviation, he bought a reliable Piper Cherokee and began running independent charters across the desert Southwest. He liked the solitude of wide skies and remote airstrips, far from the corporate routines he'd left behind. On a scorching Wednesday morning, Edgar prepped his plane for a short flight from Wilson Municipal to a tiny airfield near Red Canyon Country. He expected a straightforward trip until Cynthia Rhodes appeared at the hangar, wearing a sun hat that barely shielded her anxious gaze. She nodded politely when he introduced himself, gripping a leather satchel as though it held everything that mattered. Her request was simple, a direct flight over sparsely populated desert. Edgar ran through the usual safety checks, then helped her aboard. Although most passengers asked questions about flying a small Piper, Dr. Rhodes was almost silent. The second they lifted off, her attention shifted to the horizon, as though she were counting each mile. About 15 minutes in, she cleared her throat. "Mr. Langley, would you mind diverting for a brief stop?" He raised an eyebrow. "Depends on where and why. We're on a tight fuel plan." She swallowed, glancing at her satchel. "I need to land near Cedar Butte. There's a dirt airstrip. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but it's urgent." Edgar knew Cedar Butte by reputation. Scorching winds, runways, more gravel than asphalt. "All right, but we'll have to be quick." She gave a faint nod of thanks. A few calls on the radio yielded no response, so he relied on local chatter to confirm the strip was still usable. Eventually, the Piper descended onto a patch of compacted dirt. Dust swirled around them as he shut down the engine. Dr. Rhodes hurried off, leaving Edgar alone amid silence and heat. He wandered a few steps, scanning the horizon for any sign of life. Nothing but rugged brush and an abandoned fueling shack. Before long, she returned, cheeks flushed. Edgar noticed her pant leg streaked with dust and something clenched in her hand, which she slipped into the satchel. She asked him to take off again, giving no explanation. Reluctantly, he obliged. Once airborne, she murmured an apology. "I appreciate your patience." "Everything all right?" he asked. She hesitated. "I have an important obligation. My work depends on collecting and delivering research data." She stopped, as if debating how much to reveal, then looked away. Edgar took the hint and left her to her thoughts. The flight stayed smooth until they reached the Canyon Airfield, a lonely outpost perched near dramatic red rocks. After landing, they found the place eerily deserted. No ground staff, no signs of an arranged meeting. "This is strange," Dr. Rhodes whispered, scanning the hangars. "They were supposed to meet me here." She tried calling her colleagues, but her phone showed weak reception. Edgar caught the worry in her eyes. "Need a hand?" he offered. She sighed. "My team and I are studying aquifers throughout the Southwest. Our data's time-sensitive. If I can't upload it soon, we'll miss a critical deadline. Any other way to send it?" She brightened. "If we can reach higher altitude, or find a better communication hub, I could transfer the files." He thought for a moment, recalling a high plateau region. "We can try climbing to get you phone reception, or there's an old military base near Sage Mesa. Might have a comm station if they'll let us in." "Yes," she said. "My contact mentioned that base. Please, if we could land there." He agreed, though the idea of dropping in on a decommissioned outpost made him uneasy. Still, Dr. Rhodes radiated genuine urgency. They refueled minimally at the Canyon Airfield, enough to manage the detour, and took off once more. As the Piper cruised, the air turned choppy. Gusts caught the wings, rattling the cabin. Dr. Rhodes pressed a hand to her temple, inhaling sharply. Edgar shot her a concerned look. She fumbled in her satchel for a pill bottle and swallowed one with water. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "My heart flares under stress, but I'll manage. Just sorry for all the trouble." He tried to keep the flight smooth, adjusting altitude to dodge the worst turbulence. The desert below stretched in rippling heat waves. Eventually, A cluster of faded hangars and runways appeared on the horizon of the old base. Edgar radioed in, getting static, then a terse voice granting permission to land. Moments later, the Piper bumped along a runway, overgrown with tumbleweeds. Two uniformed figures approached, though their attire wasn't standard Air Force. Dr. Rhodes presented an ID, exchanging quiet words about urgent research and secure line. They led her to a small building, where she immediately plugged a tablet into outdated radio equipment. Edgar lingered near the entrance, overhearing fragments about water shortages and the risk of contamination in remote wells. 10 minutes later, Dr. Rhodes exhaled in relief. "All right. I've sent everything." Then she staggered, gripping a table to keep her balance. Edgar hurried over, worried she might faint. She waved him off but looked exhausted. "Ma'am, do you need medical help?" one of the uniformed men asked. "I'll be fine," she insisted, then turned to Edgar. "There's one more place I need to reach. My main team's stationed at Painted Sands. That's where we'll finalize the project." Though part of him wanted to protest 2 unscheduled stops already, Edgar found himself nodding. "Let's go," he said, voice resigned but supportive. She sent him a grateful smile that somehow made it feel worthwhile. Fuel was topped off from a rickety truck, and they set out again, aiming for Painted Sands. The midday sun blazed, turning the cockpit into an oven. Turbulence returned with a vengeance. Edgar wrestled the controls as the Piper lurched and rocked. Dr. Rhodes inhaled slowly, shutting her eyes as if bracing for each jolt. They approached Painted Sands near dusk. The place was a dusty plateau dotted with dunes that shifted in the wind. Edgar called in on the local channel, receiving a static-laced go-ahead. Landing was a challenge. Blowing sand scoured the runway. A sudden downdraft slammed them just before touchdown, sending the plane skidding sideways. Edgar fought to steady it, heart pounding. Eventually, the Piper rolled to a stop, battered but intact. He turned to check on Dr. Rhodes. She wore a shaken smile. "You're an excellent pilot," she whispered. "Could have been worse." Once they shut down the engine, a handful of people emerged, some in field gear, others in dusty hats. Dr. Rhodes introduced Edgar to her colleagues, a group of environmental researchers studying hidden aquifers. Their base camp was a row of canvas tents ringed by portable generators and instrument tables. Edgar noticed piles of equipment for measuring water flow rates and contaminants. Inside the largest tent, Dr. Rhodes produced a USB drive from her satchel. The head researcher plugged it into a laptop, scanning new data. A ripple of excitement spread through the team apparently. These numbers confirmed urgent conditions in local water sources. While they pored over the data, Edgar slumped in a corner, sipping water. He overheard them discussing how unregulated drilling and possible chemical dumping might wreak havoc on aquifers. Some remote communities, and much of the desert wildlife, depended on those hidden reservoirs. Now, the team finally had proof. They needed to act fast. "Well done, Cynthia," said an older scientist. "The final puzzle piece is here." She exhaled with relief, but the strain showed in her eyes. Edgar realized how high the stakes were if they failed to alert authorities in time. Entire habitats could be threatened. Night fell, bringing cooler air. Dr. Rhodes stepped outside to breathe under a canopy of stars. Edgar joined her, the sense of desert solitude immense. "Thank you," she said. "I know today was chaotic, but we had to gather these readings before it was too late." He nodded, gazing at the silent dunes. "I get it. My hometown nearly ran dry once. We never really recovered. Water is everything here." She offered a small smile. "That's exactly it. Our findings could help push for new policies to protect what's left. Without these aquifers, entire regions could collapse." Over the following days, Edgar realized he wasn't just a random pilot anymore. The researchers asked him to shuttle them between Painted Sands and the nearest settlement for supplies, and to gather water samples from remote desert wells. He found himself enthralled by their mission, driving alone through the sky, scanning for weather shifts, occasionally landing on makeshift airstrips, all in service of a cause bigger than any he'd known. Dr. Rhodes's condition flared a few times, forcing her to pause and take medication. Yet she pressed on, working late nights to refine their reports. Edgar hovered anxiously each time, but she'd wave him off. "I'm fine. We have to see this through." Days passed. Dust storms came and went, and the team's data grew more compelling. Talk of a water crisis spread to local news outlets, and word reached the nearest government offices. Officials sent inquiries, leading to urgent phone calls and hurried online conferences. Edgar was amazed at how quickly a handful of field scientists could trigger a wave of attention. "Hopefully it's enough," Dr. Rhodes said one evening, eyes weary. "We've sounded alarms before, but this time we have the numbers to back it up." In a fitful desert dawn, the researchers compiled their final presentation. Dr. Rhodes would stay at Painted Sands a bit longer to manage follow-ups, but the major data sets had been transmitted. The crisis, they said, was far from solved. There would be debates, funding battles, bureaucratic red tape, but at least the region's plight was now on record. Edgar prepared the Piper for departure, loading up minimal gear and checking the fuel levels once more. Standing by the aircraft, he watched the camp begin to dismantle. "Doctor," Rhodes approached, looking more relaxed than before. "You've done more than you know," she said, handing him a folded note. Inside was a contact for a conservation group linked to the research. "If you want to keep flying these missions, call them. They're always short on pilots who can handle remote conditions." He felt a spark of gratitude. "Thank you. I'd be honored." With a last handshake, he climbed into the cockpit, started the engine, and taxied for takeoff. Painted Sands vanished behind him, replaced by endless desert ridges. On the flight back to Wilson Municipal, the cabin felt lighter despite the crosswinds. Edgar realized that, in a short span, he'd been drawn into a cause that resonated with him more than any routine job had. His phone rang a week later, just as he was finalizing a mundane hop for tourists. The voice on the other end belonged to Dr. Rhodes. She spoke in hushed excitement, explaining that an agency had granted emergency funding for aquifer monitoring. Could he assist with new remote flights? Edgar grinned. "Point me in the right direction," he said simply. And so he found himself in the sky once again, charting courses not just for the sake of traveling, but for safeguarding the precious resources hidden beneath the desert's cracked surface. Day by day, Edgar felt a deeper purpose that made each takeoff and landing feel vital. He was no longer a lone pilot wandering from airstrip to airstrip. Now, each flight carried the promise of protecting fragile land and the people who depended on it. Occasionally, he recalled that tense moment of landing at Painted Sands, the plane buffeted by wind. How easy it would have been to turn around, to say the job was too risky, yet he was glad he hadn't. Through Dr. Rhodes's mission, he'd glimpsed a world that needed all the help it could get. Sometimes, a single, unexpected passenger could change everything, even for a pilot who thought he'd already seen it all. Now, whenever he soared over the empty desert, Edgar carried not just the hum of the engine, but also the knowledge that on these lonely stretches of earth below, life was fighting to survive. And, thanks to him and a determined researcher, more people were starting to notice. He touched down at a familiar remote strip late one afternoon, greeted by a handful of scientists with new equipment to load. He smiled, thinking that, once upon a time, he might have dreaded yet another complicated detour. Now he welcomed it, ready to bank through shifting winds, race sundown, and land on unmarked runways, knowing that every flight might help preserve something irreplaceable. After all, that was what he'd learned. Sometimes the smallest decisions, like saying yes to an unplanned landing or waiting a little longer for a stressed passenger, open doors to extraordinary possibilities. And with each new assignment, Edgar felt the same rush of purpose he'd found in Painted Sands. One more flight, one more chance to make a difference, all under the same wide sky he'd been crossing his whole life.